acquainted with setting up a basic server with Express, Node.js and TypeScript, let's talk about more about routing. Routing is a very important part of your application, and when setting it up, you can have a very large REST API that you are creating for your maybe mobile app or for some web currently maybe some single page application that you're making, or just some simply utility app. And some routing, you cannot just stack up some routing in just one file. You have our callbacks which are being passed in, and you might have very complex business logic with so many callbacks and many functions. So it's usually a good practice to separate them into a separate folder. And for here now we can see that we are just setting up a simple router here, and if you want to have a app.post, and we can see that TypeScript is giving us IntelliSense, and you can see pass it and say currently we said like say API / maybe sign up, and then next up we'll do copy this, and then we'll make another simple route handler here and say app dot, let's say get again, or maybe patch. You see, giving us some IntelliSense from TypeScript, which is pretty nice, and it can do some type catching, if you put in some wrong things, it's usually not a perfect, but it gives you a very nice use. And Express is all about middlewares, so sometimes you might want some handlers to invoke on every set of a middleware, and this type of middlewares, like we can have something like a simple logger. We can create a simple logger middleware which will just say app.use, and then this will pass it a callback that will be invoked on each and every request. So for each and every request, I can say I want a function. This will just take a request, a response, and a next, and we can say that we want him to console.log. Here we will just say console.log. Let's say let it log the request that let's say not base URL. We can just say to maybe log the headers and say headers. So on each and every request it will do a log here, and this is a synchronous function. After it ends, Express will call the next middleware. So if you have a stack of middleware each, if we had another app.use here, so it will call the next, and that's what this next is. Here is the current request, and this is the response object. You can set some variables here, and there are some certain methods this one to call, such as res.send and other things, and that's where TypeScript tends to help us. So for example, if we want to cancel our current this one and let me send the user something if some certain condition is met, we can just say res.send, and we'll just pass in something here, and it will send it back, and this one. But maybe if it doesn't meet this condition, we want to execute the next handler. That is where the next function comes in, which we'll just call in as next. But if we call next with the first argument like an error, this error will be passed, and it will be passed to an error handler. But currently that's not what we're discussing, and let's just skip it, and we'll just see how this simple logger works. So now we're gonna start our application, but we're starting it from www.ts, as you remember. So I'm doing node bin www.js, and if I start my server now and I make a request in Postman, and I say, let's say I'm making this test, call this test. Well, this current request is logging in the header. You can see it's logging in headers, and kind of like it's just a function which has been logged out, but we're not calling in the next function. So if we want to solve this, we'll do like after it has logged it out, we'll call in next, because it's it's a middleware. So middleware will take our request and response, do something with it, change it, do whatever it want to do with it, and then after it's done, it will call the next. Maybe if it's doing something and has an error, then it will call this function with the error. So let's say we have something like if 1 plus 1 is 1 plus 1, or something like that, or let's say if false, we'll just say do something like res dot set error or something, and then do next after that, but call it with some error, and then maybe generate a new error object. But that we're not doing right now, and we'll just see how this works. So now we'll call in next. That's after we have logged it out, we'll call the next function. So in here we'll stop my server, restart it, and then when we'll come here, we'll just send it, and we see that now test successfully called. That's because after we have logged this out, we'll call next, and the next middleware here is just a simple request handler. It's not really a middleware like app.use. So these are all top level, app level routers. This we don't need right now, as well, was just for demonstration. So app level routing is good, but we might have very complicated logic in this, so it's very good practice to separate them into some folders, and we'll have them stacked into some files. And to do that, we'll create a simple folder that will hold these routes. So we're gonna separate our out based on some certain routes. So I'm gonna create a directory called routes, and then in this directory I'm gonna create a simple TypeScript file that will hold all routes that concern like signing in and sign out, or some authentication, some routes that have to do with authentication. Because right now I want to create a simple way to log in, sign up, sign in, and maybe get the current user, the current authenticated user. So we're going to add some simple authentication to our application, and we'll be doing that step by step. So in here in our routes folder, we want to create a simple routes file, a route TypeScript file that will be compiled to JavaScript, and then it will be our some kind of contain all routes and route handlers for authentication. So in here I will call this the auth routes file, and then in this auth route file I will simply use something in Express called the router. The router, it's like a simple mini application, and to use the router I will use some import here. I'm gonna use ES6 imports here because I'm using TypeScript, but if you're using JavaScript you just do some var and some other things. But here we're using TypeScript, so as we'll be also learning a little bit of TypeScript as we're using our application. So you can see it's giving me IntelliSense here from my editor, and if you do like this, you can simply know what modules are being exported from our TypeScript project. The ones with the I are interfaces. That's if you're using this IDE, you see these interfaces, but I currently need the router module here. And this router, it's like a simple mini application that we can instantiate and then make use of it as a middleware in our server.ts file here. So in here I'm just gonna set up a few routes which will be very important for me. So this routes includes sign in, sign up, yep. So in here now I can just come here into my application and start to set up some of these routes. So here I can do something like router, create a simple instance of a router. So I can do router is equals to, just create a router. And you remember I said this is a simple mini application. The router, it's like a small context of your application that you're generating. It's like you're instantiating Express, but this one is not a self-sustaining app like a whole Express that you can use .listen. So it's just a simple part that we're gonna plug in into our main application level router, just in order to make our app more clean and have some certain context in our application. So some of the routes we'll be having is, if you see here, we'll be doing some routes like a post, we'll have some post and we'll have some get. So I will just create a simple skeleton for this here. First I will need a route, like let's say a sign up route, and then next up I will need another post route, which will be have a sign in, and then we'll also need another one, like something, a get request that will be made to get the current user. So this will call it the me route. Currently right now they don't have callbacks, they don't have request handlers. And then when you are done setting up your router, it's you will export it from your application. So in here we'll just export it as a default export. Thanks for the fact that we're using TypeScript, we can just simply do a simple export default. It's like it's just following the ECMAScript 6 standards. That's the good thing about TypeScript. It's just normal, it follows every standard, it does not create a whole new language of its own. So I'm just going to export the current router, and then we're going to make use of this router in our, import it in our server.ts file. So as we have it here, I will just use an ES6-way models of importing our router here. So I'm just gonna do something like import, let's say, auth routes from, I will just have it like not like this, sorry, it's not from, it's from routes and auth routes. So you can see that our IDE gives us very clean IntelliSense there. And now that we imported our auth routes, we can make use of it as a middleware. So let's clean up this logger that we have here. So we'll take out this logger here out, and then I will just make use of this part. And actually your app that you use can be made use of in a very similar way to make use of post, get and other things. So you can say that for certain particular routes I want it to run this middleware. So for certain routes that have to do with authentication, so I'm going to set it like API/auth. So for all routes that have to do with authentication, please can you make use of this router middleware. So we're going to mount it here. So this is a handler, and this handler is from our auth routes folder here, and it just contains some other handlers, you know, it's like a mini application. And in here, now that we have this setup, we can simply give this some simple request handlers to test them out. So in here I'm going to set up a callbacks. The whole notion of Node.js is so much use of callbacks. So our handlers are callbacks, which are just functions that take a request and a response. And this response, we can just simply say res.send, and we'll tell them that sign up called. So in here we'll just do sign up called, and then we can see that have another function here, take a request, take a response, and then we can say res.send, and then we'll just send sign in called. And then our me, which is a simple get request, I can also have the same kind of request handler for it, which is take a request and a response as usual, and then it will just, you know, send back a simple string, say me successfully called. We'll just say me called, that will be enough. So once we set that up here, we can simply start our server and see how our middleware works. So in here I want to simply start my server again. So I'm gonna do node www.js, again start it, and once we start, we can come here to our postman and make some simple request. So in here, if we remembered, we set it an API / sign in, right? Let's start with sign up first, and then when we hit it's a post request. So we'll hit post request, and apparently it can't find that. It's on API /out /sign up. So once we hit this route, we can see that sign up called successfully, which it gave us a 200 OK. So we can see that our request handlers are working perfectly fine. And in here now we see that separating your app into some other app level from the app level router, it's a good idea, as you can have some multiple routes in your route file here and in separate files, and also have separate handlers, very cleanly. So in here, we're sending some post requests, and as we know from the REST API point of view, is that post request is you'll send in data, and this data will be passed and sent. So we can send back JSON, we can do some things here, but I want to show you some notions of TypeScript that is very good here. TypeScript gives you type inference. So for example, if you don't know some methods on your request object, you can simply import and tell him that, hey, the request here is of type, this is of type request and type response, right? So in here we can simply type annotate this and say this is type request, and then this is of type response. So if we'll do this, we can get very nice IntelliSense. So we can get nice IntelliSense like, say, request dot, and then we can see we get this IntelliSense. We can see we have things like JSON, request dot accepts, and body, and then you see the body is of type any, and some types this one. Some things that are methods will know that it's method. So maybe you might think, is it header? Because we have something here, headers, that is a property that contains headers, and then there's a header which is a method that extracts a certain header and returns it. There's a get, which is a method, and we'll see all of this, and it only shows you what is part of your request object. And then also same thing for response. And if you want to say response and you say JSON, you can see that, yeah, we can call a method here called rest.json, and we can also see some things like you can send a cookie, we can set the status, like say status. You can see our status takes in a number, and we can set our status to it's like our status code. So for example, if we set the status code to, like, say 404, and then do a send, and let's say we're sending in, sorry, this is not found, but actually it's found. So we're setting our status code. If you just send without any certain status code, it will just automatically send you 200. So we're gonna just cancel that out there, and we're gonna just restart our server again, and then come to Postman and see how this works. So in here I can just say sir, and we can see it says 44, and it gives us a message, sorry, this not found. So we can see that TypeScript helps us with a lot of things like IntelliSense and do some type checking. So for example, if the status I pass in a string, so if for example I pass in a string like this, we can see that TypeScript will complain. Also, if we'll come here and stop the server here and use the TypeScript compiler on the command line. So if we'll do tsc, if you have a ts config, you don't need to specify a file, so you just run tsc and it will automatically do that. So in our TypeScript compilation, it will tell us that, hey, cannot find name this, it's because this is not found here. And also if we pass in, for example, instead of a number, and we'll pass in let's say a 44 in form of a string, let's pass in 404 but as a string, save it, and then in here I can run my TypeScript compiler. So they say, oh, error, argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type number. So you don't have to run this before you know that it's, it's not just gonna give us some runtime error. It will do some type checking and make sure that everything is pretty fine before it runs. And you can see here our IDE2 knows about this, because our IDE2 has its own TypeScript compiler, and instead of always typing TSC always there, your IDE automatically does the TypeScript compilations, and it will just show it for you down there. So we can just correct this back and set it back to a simple number, but we don't need all of that here, so we'll just come back here and get this back to normal. So we have learned about how to set this up, and